All right, that wasn't quite a minute, but we'll go ahead and get started. We got a couple of slides just to open up with just some housekeeping. I will share my screen. All right, as we said earlier, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As always, this webinar is being recorded. It will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which you can find by either searching SPEAR on YouTube, or you can go to our website at eepartnerships.org, and under our news section, you'll find our resources page. Once you're on the resources page, you'll find a link to our channel. Within 72 hours of today's presentation, you'll receive a course evaluation email from Kathy Lawrence. Please complete the survey and send it back to her to receive your course completion certificate that will contain the course ID that you'll need to use when you're reporting your CEUs to ICC. Lastly, the chat feature is open and report any technical difficulties you might be experiencing during the presentation. The Q&A feature is also open. Please use that to post any questions you might have as we go through the presentation. If it's pertinent to the slide on the screen, we'll answer it in real time. If not, we'll wait till the end if it's about something different. All right, for those that are first joining us for this, just an intro real quick to SPEAR and what SPEAR does. So SPEAR is one of 6 RIOs throughout the country. That's energy efficiency organizations. So we provide training, webinars, in-person field training, as well as IECC test prep for training for anyone looking to get certified. The price is always right. It's always free. I can help answer questions regarding energy code, ASHRAE 90.1, can help with questions from plan reviewers to building officials to third-party energy inspectors. So happy to help. We've also assisted several cities with the adoption of the 2021 and how to navigate all the additional amendments that are being made to lessen the impact of the adoption. My contact information will be at the end of this presentation, so feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Also, feel free to share my information to anybody that might need to have us reach out to them and set up something for training on site and or a specific webinar for a specific group. So today we have Erica Larson from ICF. Erica, I will turn it over to you and let you do your intro.
Sounds good. Let me
stop sharing my screen. All right.
There we go. All right. Is that coming through for you all?
We got it. Thank you.
Great. So my name is Erica Larson. I'm Manager of Regulatory Affairs and Market Development at ICF. I am based in Minnesota. So if you take I-35 north for a few days, you get to me. So with that, I will go ahead and jump into the presentation. So let's start with some background information on the Inflation Reduction Act and IIJA big picture. So these are, especially the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest laws that Congress has ever passed tackling climate change in the United States. So you see here is sort of the projections of what the Inflation Reduction Act is expected to do to carbon emissions, and it really gets us most of the way there to the 2040 goal that the United States has. As you can see, a huge amount of money going into clean energy and climate. A lot of this money is going with tax credits to renewable generation, but there's also a big chunk of it that's going towards customer-facing programs like energy efficiency, electric vehicles, building electrification, and so on. It's expected to drive $3.5 trillion in new investments in energy infrastructure and supply. So you can see here is a projection from the Rapid Energy Policy Institute out of Princeton, I believe, showing their expectations for growth in wind, solar, nuclear, these different cleaner fuels. The big takeaway here, I think, from an energy efficiency or customer programs perspective is that there's already been a significant shift towards intermittent sources of electricity supply. And it's only going to accelerate as a result of these acts, which I think makes it more important for utilities and other folks to be paying attention to how energy efficiency, how smart devices, how demand response programs, things like that, can serve the grid and help mitigate some of the problems we see with these intermittent renewables and their unpredictability in when they'll produce. In terms of themes in the acts, we have sort of three, there's lots of different ways to slice it, but, we see sort of three kinds of big picture things that I'm going to emphasize today. The first is a blending of energy efficiency, demand response, distributed energy resources, and electrification. I'll talk about that in some specifics for some of the programs as we go through here today, as that's quite important to what we're talking about. Another one, and this is particularly true in IIJA, is a focus on resiliency and grid flexibility, and sort of preparing the grid, like I said, for all of these intermittent resources, and also preparing the grid for climate change. And then finally, there's a strong emphasis on environmental justice and investment in disadvantaged communities. And that will also come up in some of the provisions we're looking at in more detail today. Mechanisms for clean energy funding. So there's sort of three buckets that you can put into you could split the money from the through two acts into. The first is tax credits and deductions. These are exclusive to the Inflation Reduction Act. They have immediate and near-term impacts. For the most part, almost entirely, they went into effect of January 1 this year. There are a few where we're waiting on pieces of guidance. There are things that are needed before they really take off, but many of them are up and running, and pretty much all of them are technically available under the law as of right now. Loan guarantees. What a loan guarantee is it's sort of a backing by the federal government. So the federal government isn't providing the loan directly, but they are saying, if the entity that's borrowing can't pay this off, the federal government is going to pay for it. Kind of like if your parents co-signed a loan for you. There's a lot of money available in loan guarantees. Of course, the federal government isn't expecting to pay most of this out because hopefully most of the borrowers will be able to pay back the money anyway. But the idea here is that it can reduce the cost of financing for clean energy investments. And finally, we have funded grant loan rebate programs. We're going to spend some time on this today because a lot of the energy efficiency and customer-facing programs are in this bucket. These are going to have more moderate to longer term impacts. Many of them are starting to get going, particularly from the earlier law from IIJA. Many of the IRA ones are still in the stages of, we're getting guidance, people are putting in applications, but we haven't actually seen a lot of that IRA money from these programs come out the door yet and start influencing our economy. Though that'll probably happen more and more late this year and into 2024. So here is a picture sort of showing the flow of IRA and IIJA money to different entities and of the different categories. I want to point out that neither of these sides add up to 145 billion. They both add up to more because a lot of programs do multiple things and can go to multiple entities. So you might have an energy efficiency and an electrification provision, some grant funding that could be used for either. That is open to states, local governments, and tribal governments, for example. So then you'd have double counting on both sides. But to sort of give you a sense of where the money flows and what entities can get different amounts, we put this together, this little spaghetti chart. And you can see that sort of the big winners here are local governments, tribal governments, nonprofits, states, very much so. Investor-owned utilities have a lot, but we're going to talk about in a second how they don't really have a lot when it comes to customer programs. They kind of have a lot of the other things on the left-hand side over here. So most of the funding that investor-owned utilities have access to is for things like transmission, generation, and carbon capture. And this is just talking about grant and rebate funding. Tax credits are a whole different ball of wax. And those, again, it's going to be a lot of generation things, a lot of building of solar, wind, things like that, that is going to flow to investor-owned utilities. But here are sort of the big programs that utilities have access to. And we'll talk in a bit about just the couple that have sort of an energy efficiency angle to them. So this is now zooming in even further to talk about customer facing programs. So energy efficiency, electric vehicles, building electrification, things where you need a lot of people to sign up to do something green, right? And for investor-owned utilities, there are really two direct grant opportunities. The first is a program to deploy technologies for enhanced grid flexibility. I'm going to talk a little more about that one as it's really the more more on point one. And the other one is a program that's really focused on grid resilience, but it could include distributed energy resources if you're making a case that they support grid resilience. The point there is grid hardening, but that does have that DER angle. And then on the other side, we have 73 billion for customer programs that go to other folks. The ones I have in blue here, I'm going to dig into with some more specific slides in a minute. But you see there's a lot for electric vehicles. There's a money for weatherization assistance program, various things that are targeted at rural communities or disadvantaged communities fall into that 73 billion opportunity that does not go and cannot go directly to investor-owned utilities. So with that, I'll talk just briefly about the couple of direct funding opportunities for IOUs. So this first one is deployment of technologies to enhance grid flexibility, I believe is what the DOE is calling it. There's going to be 600 million expended annually through 2026. The first couple rounds of funding have already gone out. They've actually went out at the same time last year, but there's going to be continuing rounds every year. What this is a 50-50 grant matching program that pays for various devices and analytics to sort of smarten up the grid and use customer resources like EVs, batteries, maybe water heaters, different things like that in a smart way. Last year, entities seeking funding for 2023 were required to submit concept papers by January 13th. These concept papers are pretty minimal work. They're short. There's a 18-page maximum limit, and then if DOE likes your concept paper, they invite you back, and then you put in a fuller application. This year, we think things are going to move a little faster. That last year was the first year DOE did this, so things ran a little late. This year, we're expecting more like late Q3 into, I guess we're into Q4 already, so it's early Q4. It's coming up soon that they're probably going to open up this concept paper for the next round of funding. Like many things in both acts, there is a focus on supporting equity, justice, advancing good paying jobs, things that the Biden administration is really focused on, in alignment with the administration's Justice 40 initiative, which aims to make 40% of the benefits of these acts flow to disadvantaged communities. You can only get one award per entity as a utility. And it's going to be, I think on the previous slide, it's a 50-50 matching program. If you look over to the right, here are some of the things that might be eligible for this. Electric vehicle charging programs, behind the meter battery storage, virtual power plants, vehicle to grid programs, smart thermostat optimization programs. So not really classic energy efficiency, but sort of smart grid technologies that are very much related to energy efficiency programs and certainly customer facing programs. And with that, that sort of concludes the things that are directly available to investor-owned utilities in the space. But although there aren't very many direct opportunities to apply for grants, loans, rebates, there are a lot of programs that are going to affect utility programs, and a lot of opportunities for other players to enter the energy efficiency space and be providing money to customers for energy efficiency and other, sort of green things. So first, let's talk about tax credits and deductions, which flow, of course, generally directly to the person who has done the project, the residential customer, the commercial customer. The ones in blue, I have some more detailed slides on in a bit, but maybe looking at some of the other ones, there is an increased credit for efficient new homes. And that now to get the maximum credit, you have to go all the way to a DOE net zero energy ready standard. This used to be aligned with Energy Star, and there is a lower credit still aligned with the Energy Star requirements, but this is sort of one of the points where you're blurring a little bit into electrification. DOE Net Zero Energy Ready doesn't require an all-electric home, but it does kind of favor an all-electric home. So this is one of the ways in which the Act is sort of pushing you in that really efficient, probably highly electric direction. There's a whole suite of new and sort of revamped credits for electric vehicles. There has been previously a credit for new electric vehicles, but it was designed to spur new manufacturers of electric vehicles to enter the space, and it phased out after a certain number of vehicles were sold. So, for example, Tesla had sold so many electric vehicles in the United States, new Teslas were no longer eligible for the credit. This has now changed. It is no longer tied to a certain number per manufacturer, but it is shifted to try to support lower and moderate income individuals and also less expensive cars. So there's a limit on there's an upper limit on how expensive the car can be. And there's also an income limit on the household for claiming this credit. There's also a new credit for used electric vehicles. This is sort of an equity angle to help folks that maybe aren't in the market for getting a new electric vehicle, but could buy a used one. There is, very exciting for fleet electrification programs, a new credit for commercial electric vehicles. The light duty credit mirrors the one that's available to just residential homeowners. And then for very large pieces of electric equipment, you could get up to $40,000. There's also changes to the charging infrastructure tax credit. The amount has increased. I want to say before it was 30,000, but I need to double check that number. Now it's up to 100,000, but it's also limited now to disadvantaged communities and rural areas. So increasing this credit, but also targeting it into areas where may be more difficult to encourage people to build out that charging infrastructure. And then finally, there's sort of didn't change necessarily a whole lot, but there was an extension and some changes to the credit for, residential distributed energy resources. So this is the credit that has sort of been off and on available for a home, for example, that puts rooftop solar on. Now this credit, the couple exciting things. First, there is a long window for this credit now. It goes out through the life of IRA, so through the early 2030s, whereas previously it had been sort of, it existed for a year and then it would expire and then it would come back. So I know that the solar industry is very excited about this long runway that they have in front of them. And the other exciting thing is now this credit is available for standalone battery storage. Used to be that you could include battery storage, but you had to pair it with a source of generation. Now standalone is available, which could be really interesting for some programs that are promoting sort of behind the meter battery storage for its grid flexibility and resilience benefits. So the couple that I said I'd go into more detail here because they are the most key for energy efficiency programs. The first is the home retrofit tax credit. Many of you are probably familiar with this one as it existed previously. This modifies the credit found in 25C, which had expired at the end of 2021. But the law did is it actually extended the credit as it existed in 2021 through 2022, and then put in a bunch of modifications to the credit, all of which went into effect at the beginning of this year. So the general rule for this credit is it's 30% of costs up to $1,200. The previous form of this credit was, I believe, 10% of costs up to, I want to say, $500. It was definitely less than the new credits. It's generally $600 per measure, per item put in, and here's the list of measures that are subject to that $600. And then there's some special rules for different measures, including for insulation and air sealing, for which there is no cap. So for an insulation or air sealing project, an expensive project, you could get 30% of your cost all the way up to that $1,200. In addition, and this is another point at which these programs are blurring efficiency and electrification, there is a special rule for electric or gas heat pump water heaters, electric or gas space heating heat pumps, and biomass stoves or boilers, where taxpayers can get 30% of costs up to $2,000, so beyond that $1,200 cap. So if a customer did a whole bunch of things in a home in 1 year, they could, in theory, get up to $3,200 under this credit if their list of things that they did included, for example, an electric heat pump. And looking at the things that are eligible for this special rule, by far the most common thing to be putting into a residential home is going to be that electric heat pump water heater or that electric space heater. So this is really, even though gas does get in there and biomass gets in there, this is really, I think, you can drive electrification. Here are some details on the requirements for the home efficiency retrofit tax credit. I'm not going to read these to you, but maybe just a couple points to pull away here. First, the way the law works is it ties the efficiency requirements to other standards. So it ties them to Energy Star, it ties them to the Consortium for Energy Efficiency. What this means is that they will update over time. So this credit is in effect until the early 2030s. These standards are not going to stay the same until 2031, 2032. So that means that the requirements for this credit will change over time as these underlying bodies change their rules. The other thing to note here is that it's not the same necessarily in every part of the country, particularly for things like insulation, air sealing, exterior doors, windows, air conditioners. Those things are different in different climate regions. I didn't go check to see, how Oklahoma and Texas split up, but big states. So I'm expecting that there's more than one climate region in that area. So something you have to sort of think about and look up independently for your particular area. And if utility may straddle multiple climate zones. All right, so that was the residential efficiency tax credit. Now I'm going to talk about the commercial tax deduction.
Erica?
Oh, sure.
I have one question before we leave the residential. So Kenneth does ask, can landlords have multiple homes qualify?
It is not, I believe, a business credit. So it is generally not eligible. It's not available to business entities if they're like organized as an LLC or something like that. I think you could qualify if you were a landlord living in the home. It was your home plus you rented out part of it. But then you're not going to live in multiple homes. So I don't believe you could have multiple properties qualify. But let me double check on that. If you want to give me Kenneth's contact information, I can double check and just confirm my understanding on that.
Okay, we'll do that. Thanks.
All right. So commercial, any other questions on residential before I move on? And please feel free to bring in questions as we go. I'd rather have more conversation. I'll just keep going, but let me know. So first I want to talk a little bit about, some folks are less familiar with the difference between a deduction and a credit. So a credit, the way that works on a tax return is you work out, you take your income and any adjustments, and you work out, at the bottom of the tax return, here's how much money I owe. And then a credit, you subtract from how much money you owe, right? So it's like, if you owe $10,000, but you have a $3,000 tax credit, then you only owe $7,000. A deduction is higher up on the return. So what that is you take it out of your income before you apply your tax rate. So, if you have a deduction of $2,000, it's like you made $2,000 less in that year. And if your tax rate is 10%, then you subtract 2,000 and multiply your remaining income by 10%. So that means that the actual sort of bottom line value of the deduction to you is whatever the deduction is multiplied by your tax rate. So it might be, for example, 10% of the value of the total amount of the deduction. So that's just important to keep in mind, because when these numbers look really big on the deduction, you have to think, okay, but multiply them by 10% or multiply them by 15%, depending on the taxpayer. So commercial retrofit tax deduction. This modifies a deduction, again, many of you are probably familiar with, from 179D. There were the modifications to this deduction kicked in again at the beginning of 2023, like most of the tax benefits. The way this works is you have an applicable dollar amount, which we're going to talk more about how to calculate that on the next slide, multiplied by the square footage of the building that is eligible for the deduction. The big change to this, well, the dollar amount change that you multiply by, but the other big change to this is it sort of opened up, I call this the commercial retrofit tax deduction. It is open to new buildings, but the big change is on the retrofit side. So previously, this deduction had this isn't the legal term, but what I call the ASHRAE pathway, where to figure out how much the deduction was going to be for you, you compare building performance to an ASHRAE standard for a new building. And so that pathway the old pathway was available before IRA. And it made this deduction sort of hard to do if you were doing a retrofit. Technically, you could do a big retrofit project. And if you were doing enough better than that ASHRAE standard, you could get this deduction. But that's hard to do for a building that you're retrofitting when the ASHRAE standard is based on a new building. That pathway is still available, and that is the pathway for new construction. But the big change here is there's now this, I'm calling it the qualified retrofit pathway, where instead of comparing to the ASHRAE building, a retrofit can be compared to its own previous performance. In order to do this, the building has to be at least 5 years old. So again, this isn't available. This qualified retrofit is for retrofits, whereas the ASHRAE pathway is really more suitable for new construction. Either way, to get this deduction, the retrofit or construction must be built to be 25% savings as compared to whichever baseline is applicable. Both pathways require, and we're still waiting for guidance from the IRS on exactly how this is going to work, but both are going to require use of approved modeling software or certified energy professionals. Someone's going to have to sort of certify that you're meeting that 25% standard, someone with qualifications. And we're waiting still on the details of exactly what certifications, what software, how this is going to work. Here are some additional details on how that dollar per square foot is going to be calculated. So it's based on two things, really. It's based on how much savings was achieved and whether certain labor requirements are met. So at the minimum of 25% savings, which is the minimum you need to get this deduction, the deduction is 50 cents per square foot. But it increases by 2 cents for every additional percentage point reduction that is achieved. And so you can get, if you get up to 50% savings, then you get $1. And that's without doing any of the labor stuff. So it's 50 cents to $1 without labor. Now, if you do the labor stuff, and I think most folks who are pursuing this are going to, because that's where the value is you get to multiply whatever your deduction would otherwise be by 5. So it takes you from 50 cents to $1 to $2.50 to $5. So it really increases that range. To do this labor piece, you have to do basically two things. First, you have to pay prevailing wages. Prevailing wages are specific to location. There are rules by the Department of Labor about how you figure out what the prevailing wage is for who you're hiring. And you also have to meet certain apprenticeship requirements, which I'm not going to read to you, but they're sort of outlined up here on the slide. We do have additional guidance from the IRS on how to meet these labor requirements. And so if anyone's interested, I can send the IRS FAQ to you, or you probably find it fairly easily on Google. But this one was sort of expedited for guidance because it's common not just to this commercial deduction, but to many commercial or industrial programs throughout IRA use the same sort of labor rules. I think, one more slide on the commercial deduction. This is showing you just the difference between the old amount of the deduction and the new amount for different sizes of buildings. I always have to say on this one that you have to be, it is actually a linear relationship. The line makes it look like it's exponential or something, but it's just because we wanted to pick certain sizes of buildings to show you, like, this is a CVS and this is a Costco. But the old deduction was pretty much just a flat $1.80. The new deduction can be, as we just talked about, up to $5 if you meet those labor requirements. And you have that maximum 50% savings amount. Any questions on the commercial deduction before I move on to some of the non-tax programs?
There doesn't appear to be any at this time.
Great. Keep moving. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit now about so those were tax things. Now we're moving on, really talk more about grants and rebates. And again, we're still in the category of things that are not available directly to the investor-owned utility. So this program, which has been called the Homes Program, DOE wants to use a different name for it now, but in the act, it's actually called the Homes Program. This is one that is mostly this is available to states. So this is a program for whole home retrofits. It's a $4.3 billion program in total. DOE can take a little bit of that money for their own administration of the program. And then the rest of it is going to flow to states according to a funding allocation. which is basically related to state population. So California gets a lot of money, South Dakota doesn't get nearly as much money. It's a little more complicated than that, but it's roughly relation to population. Once the state gets their money, they can spend 20% of that money on their own administrative needs, on staff, on whatever they need to do from an admin perspective. And then they're supposed to spend 80% of it on incentives to citizens in their state. We do have fairly recently guidance from the DOE on how states can apply for this money, what they need to put in their application. It's a pretty extensive piece of guidance. It's, I think, 100 something pages for this program and the next similar program that we're going to talk about. States have until August 2024 to confirm or choose not to confirm that they will apply for this money, that they want this money. If a state chooses not to go after the money or doesn't, confirm by August 2024, DOE has said that they're going to reallocate the funding from those states that don't want it to states that have said that they do want it, they do intend to apply. Then the application itself is going to be due on January 31st, 2025. This is a whole home retrofit program, and it's the rebate amount for the household will be based on the amount of savings achieved in that retrofit. And there are two different pathways to proving the savings. The first is, we're calling it the modeled pathway, and the other one is the measured pathway. So modeled is like what it sounds, is a software program. You go, you model the home before and after. So you model like, well, right now the home has an 85% efficient gas furnace. It doesn't have insulation. This is the SEER value on the air conditioner. We are going to do, these 10 measures in the home, and we model that that's going to result in X percentage savings using a DOE approved software program. So that's one way to do it. And you can see here, there's rebate amounts of between 20 and 35% savings under the model pathway. The home could get the lesser of $2,000 or 50% of project cost. If there's greater than 35% savings, then you get a higher rebate amount. The measured savings pathway is, again, sort of like what it sounds, it's measured. So you have data, you got to get it from the utility company somehow, probably, showing this is the energy use of the building before the retrofit, and then we're going to measure it after the retrofit and see what the difference is. This one is actually, it's a linear relationship. There's a certain point that's set at 20% savings. I believe it's $2,000 that you pay out under the measured pathway, but states actually have flexibility to define the slope of the line, as long as they don't pay rebates for anything less than 15%. I expected DOE to tell us what the slope of that line was, but they didn't. They just sort of left it up to states, which is interesting. So it could be, if you get 8% savings, you could get a lot more in some states than in others. Whereas the modeled savings, the rebate amounts are spelled out by statute, so those are locked in. States also have the flexibility in this program to not do both the measured and the modeled pathways. They can select to do only one or the other. And then you have to sort of talk about their choice with DOE, but they do have that option open to them. In particular, states where maybe they don't have the utility meter data, the AMI data, the modeled might be a little bit easier than the measured. But there are some states where they're really sort of already operating measured programs. New York and California in particular come to mind, where they sort of already are kind of going down the road with that structure for some other programs. So they may really want to lean into that for this. There are also rebates available here for multifamily building owners. Basically the same rebates, but everything is done per unit, and there is a cap per building. And then you take all these rebates and you double them for low income households. So this program, unlike the next one we're going to talk about, is actually open to any income level. No matter how wealthy, you could technically get this rebate, but the funding is double for LMI households. And one thing I don't have up on this slide, but that the DOE has said in their guidance, is they want to see the amount of rebates from this program and the next program we're going to talk about that go to low income households, as in less than 80% of AMI, to model the percentage of low income households in the state. So I haven't looked this up, but say Oklahoma has 45% low income folks in the state of Oklahoma. The Oklahoma Energy Office then should try to come up with a program that's going to get at least 45% of those rebates out to those low income qualifying households. This program, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, just one quick question. I thought we were done with that slide. The measure, would that be a third party, like a third party energy doing an energy audit for measuring in and out?
There does need to be a certified person, and there's a list in the DOE guidance of what certifications they will recognize. So states are going to have to come up with some way to have those, these certified folks come out and do the measurement or the modeling pursuant to the DOE guidance, meeting all of the requirements. Your question about whether it probably it's going to be a third party, probably it's going to be some sort of auditor person that's doing this and then submitting things to the state. But states have some flexibility in how exactly they want to structure that, and whether maybe they want to hire people. I think that would be probably pretty costly, but there's probably different ways to do it.
Would this fall into a category of if the state is already doing a weatherization program with it testing in and testing out, would this qualify?
I suspect that the certifications and the qualifications of the people who are doing a weatherization program would qualify. Like they've probably got the education and the background to do this too. But this program is different, and the way that you model and measure savings may be different. And also, who is eligible for this program is very clearly different. So the weatherization assistance program has generally a lower income cap. So fewer homes would be eligible for that program. Then this program has a higher, this one in particular has no income cap, but even that 80% AMI is higher than what would be eligible for the WAP program.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. And then the last thing I was going to say before leaving the slide, and this is related, is that for any single measure that is included in this program, it cannot get federal funding from another source. So that includes the residential electrification rebates we're about to talk about. It also includes the WAP program. So, if you include, for example, you're doing a modeled home, and you install a new heat pump in that home as part of the homes program, and that's part of that calculated into the rebate that the home gets here, then you can't get money for that heat pump from the residential electrification rebates program, and you can't get money for that heat pump from a WAP program or any other sort of federal grant or rebate program. You could get a tax credit for that heat pump. That's sort of separate. You could potentially, depending on how the state wants to work it, get utility funding for that heat pump, but you can't sort of double up with any other federal grant programs. All right. With that, I will move on to residential electrification rebates. This is, as you can see, kind of a very similar program in structure. There's a little bit more money in this one to start off with, that 4.5 billion, but there's a carve out for tribal governments. So the amount going to each state is actually just a little bit less under this program than it is under the home appliance rebates program we just talked about, the whole home retrofit. This one, in some ways, is simpler than the homes program. The homes program is you do a whole house, you model the house, or you measure, whatever. This one is just prescriptive rebate program, very similar to a lot of classic utility programs, where there's this amount available for this measure, and you have to meet these efficiency requirements for this measure. And you can see those amounts at the bottom here. They're all up to amounts, and we do have clarity now from the DOE that the state has flexibility to pick different amounts, and the state also has flexibility to not include all of these measures. So if a state, for whatever reason, doesn't want to do electric stoves and cooktops, they don't have to. They can put their money more into water heaters and space heating. It's up to the state on that. This one has the same deadlines, the same requirement to confirm the state wants to participate, August 2024. Maybe the hardest thing about this program is that it is entirely income qualified. So whereas the last one is technically open, but there was sort of double rebates available if you were below 80% AMI, this one is only available to households up to 150% area median income. And again, the doubling is available for less than 80% AMI. So everyone going through this is going to have to go through some sort of income qualification. The other thing about this is that states have to make point of sale rebates available somehow. So there's going to have to be some system for someone going, showing up at for example, if the state is including electric stoves, someone's going to have to be able to show up at Home Depot, somehow prove that they're below the income caps and eligible for this program, and they haven't already claimed money for another electric stove, and get their rebate right there at the Home Depot. So that's probably the trickiest thing, is marrying that point of sale rebate with the income qualification. Maybe the other thing to talk about here is, this is an electrification program, so only electric measures or measures supporting electrification are available. The money is available for new construction, if a state wants it to be. And it is also available to replace a non-electric appliance. So, a gas furnace could be replaced with a heat pump, or, a propane water heater could be replaced with an electric water heater. But you can't just replace, for the most part, you can't replace electric with electric, with exceptions for like very low efficiency, like baseboard heating. You can use this money to replace with an electric heat pump. You can also keep, this is maybe more applicable in Minnesota because it's really cold here, but probably also in parts of Texas and Oklahoma, you can keep the home's existing heating system as backup, but you will have to switch the primary heating source. If you want to do this program, you have to switch the primary heating source to an efficient air source heat pump. Or, yeah. All right. Questions on this one?
No, that's a good point you made there at the very end, because we're starting to see a lot of push from manufacturers for doing dual fuel. So you're going heat pump for the coil unit, but you can also act as a cooling, and then but leaving an 80% or 90+ furnace for gas in there to switch in case of emergency. So yeah, thanks for that point at the end.
Yeah, that was in Minnesota, it's a little hard to convince people to totally give up their gas furnace. So it was a kind of a critical point in our state.
Probably that would be the same for both Texas and Oklahoma.
Okay, even that far south. Good to know. All right, so those are the two big DOE rebate programs. We just got the guidance from DOE on this a month and a half ago. So states are really starting to, we were kind of in a waiting pattern on these, honestly. Now states are really starting to pick up their work on it. One of the things they have to do under DOE guidance is a lot of stakeholder engagement. So I'm sure there are folks on this call who are going to be asked to talk to your state energy office about the best way to structure this program. And if you aren't asked to talk, but you have opinions, I've been encouraging people, especially my utility clients, to go talk to your state energy office. I think nobody wants a situation where these programs are confusing and customers don't know whether to go to the utility or go to the state energy office, or maybe they have different eligibility requirements. Nobody wants that mess, I don't think. So I think if I were a state energy office, I'd want to hear from utilities or anyone else in the space about how to make all of sort of this whole space work as well as it can for customers. All right, and then the last big program I wanted to go over today is the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. So this is $27 billion. It's a huge program. It is the single largest program for efficiency in terms of rebates or grants in IRA. And what it is it's a financing program, and it isn't exclusive to efficiency. It can be for rooftop solar, it can be for batteries, it can be for indoor air quality, it can be for a lot of different green applications. But it does include energy efficiency, includes vehicle electrification, building electrification, and a lot of things that this group is particularly interested in. And it's just so much money. I think we should all be aware of it. The EPA has taken this $27 billion and they've split it into 3 separate programs, as you can see on this slide. So first, there's $14 billion, which they're calling the National Clean Investment Fund. This is going to have 2 to 3 direct awardees. And what it's going to do is it's going to set up sort of big regional green banks. So those awardees are going to be nonprofit entities. The statute says they have to be. And they're going to get, several $billion to start funds to re-lend money out to different projects. And like I said, those projects can be a big variety of sort of green things, but including energy efficiency and building electrification. The second piece of this is $6 billion for Clean Communities Investment Accelerator. This is going to go to 2 to 7 awardees. So again, probably regional, but bigger region or smaller regions than under that National Clean Investment Fund. This part is the difference between this 6 billion and the 14 billion is that the intention is that this is going to be given then to sub-grantees, which might be, for example, a city or, some smaller nonprofit that serves, maybe just the state of Oklahoma, for example. And those sub-grantees are then the ones that work directly with those priority projects. And then the last piece of this fund is $7 billion, and this is Solar for All. And this one is focused specifically on solar and behind-the-meter batteries. And this one is also focused on low-income households. And this one, they're envisioning approximately an award per state. Some states might get a couple, so maybe Texas gets a couple, but most states are going to get one award. Maybe it's possible some smaller states combine together, but they're thinking about 60 awards, including the territories. And then these awardees, who might be a state energy office, or might be, some coalition of local governments, they are going to re-award funding to specific solar and battery projects, for example, in multifamily housing or residential housing, again, focusing on low and moderate income households. Questions on, and I should say this one is a little bit fast-tracked in the statute. EPA this is an EPA program, has to get the money out the door, I believe September of next year. They have to actually award it, and these things have to be stood up, which is I know maybe it doesn't sound like a fast timeline, but that's a lot. It's a very fast timeline for such a large bucket of money. So EPA is trying to work very quickly to get these awards out the door. And so we do have guidance, and we have a lot of information about how these programs are going to work, so that folks can get their applications together well in advance of that September deadline. Questions on this one before I move on to some of the wrap-up slides?
No, I'd just like to say that's a lot of moving pieces.
It's a lot of money. We just talked about, we're spending so much time on those 2 programs I talked about before that are each, 4 billion approximately. And this is just, I feel like for the energy efficiency community, it's almost flying under the radar because we don't quite know what to do with it, but it's so much money that we need to start trying to wrap our heads around it, I think.
Agreed.
All right, so here's a timeline slide to talk about some of the different federal programs. So first, we talked about at the beginning, tax credits and deductions generally went into effect on January 1, 2023. We've gotten sort of throughout the year guidance on different pieces. We've gotten a pretty full guidance on the residential efficiency credits. One of the last pieces to come in was how there's a little bit of a credit you can get for a home energy audit. And we needed to find out, what kind of certification does that auditor need to have, what exactly they need to do. We did get guidance on that this summer. So that one's pretty well wrapped up. We've gotten guidance on prevailing wage requirements, which apply to that commercial deduction and other commercial programs outside of the ones we talked about. And same for apprenticeship requirements. We are still waiting on guidance for pieces of the commercial deduction. January, February of this year, the DOE put out requests for information on the homes program and the residential electrification program, asking, I think it was January 31st. I should maybe update this slide as I know the date, but they asked for information from folks in the industry about how they should run those programs. In April of this year, they made available 1/8 of the administrative funding. So if you remember, for each of those programs, it's 20% administrative funding, 80% incentives. States were allowed, starting in April, to go in and get 1/8 of the 20%. And this was so they could start staffing up. They could start thinking about how they were going to run the programs. DOE was hearing, I think we were all hearing, especially some of these really small state energy offices that some states have. This was a lot to take on. So DOE wanted to get some administrative funding to them early so that they could start sort of putting things together. Then in June of this year, EPA opened up applications for the big 27 billion greenhouse gas reduction fund that we just went over. And so we've got pretty full guidance on this fund and how the applications are going to go in. we're waiting to see who wins it and who our big green banks are going to be. We talked about early on some of the programs that were directly available to investor-owned utilities. And the big one was the grid resilience funding, the $600 million a year that we expect to open. Didn't open in Q3, so I should, because we're in Q4 now, right? November. Yep, we're in Q4. So but it's going to be quite soon that they're going to open up funding for that. And then August 2024 is the deadline for states to submit intent to apply for the 2 DOE rebate programs. Florida has basically already said that they're going to decline the money. I'm not aware of any other state that has so far said they're going to decline, but I do know that some states are debating it. So we will see how many states go and claim that money. Every other state, because Florida declined it, all the states that are going to participate will get just a little bit of a boost in how much funding they're going to get from what the allocations say.
Yeah, I believe Texas is still on the fence with that.
Yeah. Do you know about
there
Oklahoma?
Hasn't been a decision.
Do you know about Oklahoma yet?
No, it looks like they are going to try to do that. It's still in the works with that. They've gotten a lot of push from their government from state office to actually go forward with that and do as much as they can to take advantage of this. So I think they're going to. We haven't seen anything written or put out yet, but I think they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I talked to some states that have very small state energy offices, very small government, just small population states, which isn't really the situation for either Oklahoma or Texas. But one of the issues is there's just so much stuff coming out of IRA and IIJA that they just have to prioritize. And so the question is, do they prioritize this program or do they prioritize something else that's maybe outside of the energy efficiency space?
Right.
And I feel for that.
Right.
That's a difficult position to be in. So here are the recommendations that I typically when I'm talking to a utility client that I give them on these sort of particularly these indirect opportunities, because it can be kind of hard. There's the direct opportunity, so that's pretty clear what you do with it. Like either you go after the money or you don't. But on these indirect ones, it's kind of a trickier situation for utilities. It's kind of like there's this big wave of money coming, but none of it's coming directly to you. You don't have direct control over it. It's kind of, but you do kind of need to find a way to surf that wave, how to take advantage of this money that isn't coming directly to you, and how to, make sure it doesn't crash your existing programs you don't want to wipe out. So here are some of the things that, we recommend. The first one, I think is a no-brainer, is to educate customers on availability and eligibility for tax credits and deductions. And this can be as complicated or as simple as the utility wants to make it. Some utilities I know are just sort of linking to IRS or Energy Star web pages that provide more details, and directing customers that way. Some are wanting to produce more of their own sort of branded stuff and more information to help customers understand the relationship between tax benefits and maybe the efficiency levels in their program and things like that. But I think the utilities should be doing a minimum. The first one, you should at least have some resource you can send customers to when they ask questions. Another one on the same vein is educating trade allies, especially commercial trade allies, because that deduction is kind of complicated, on how they can go after, how they can talk to their customers about these tax benefits that are available to them. Also in the commercial deduction, understanding which trade allies in your network can meet the labor requirements, because some of them are not going to be interested in doing the paperwork and figuring out how to pay prevailing wages or satisfying those apprenticeship requirements, and others are going to be interested in being able to offer that, or maybe that's just their standard business practice. So figuring out which trade allies those are, and then utilities can consider whether you wanted to be able to direct your customers to those trade allies. What you don't want is a customer to do a project, get some sort of utility rebate for it, realize next April that they could have, if they'd made, just a couple changes, they could have gotten this deduction, and now they're mad at everybody. They're mad at the trade ally, they're mad at the utility, they're just mad. You want to avoid that situation and make sure customers know beforehand what they should be doing to set themselves up for this deduction if it's something they're interested in. Another thing that utilities can do is, often, if you're doing a custom program or some sort of program where you're helping support commercial retrofits, you're going to be sending an energy professional to the site anyway. to certify that they meet the requirements for your utility program, it might be an easy thing to have them also certify that they meet the requirements for the deduction, and they have whatever certification they need for the IRS. And then whatever paperwork they hand over to the customer meets the requirements for that customer to apply for that deduction. So it's sort of just could potentially, depending on how things are structured, be just sort of an easy add-on service for customers. And then this last one, and I really want to emphasize this, as I already said, everyone in this space, utilities and anyone who has an opinion or thoughts here, should be having a dialogue with the state energy office to understand, and to the extent you want to, influence the design of the efficiency and electrification programs. I think a lot of these state energy offices are learning very quickly what is eligible, what is pre-existing in these states in terms of efficiency. And I think everybody should want all of the programs to work happily and together. So I want everyone to be talking. Personal bias, I guess. And then I just have to throw out quickly a slide of here's some things that ICF can do to help folks think this through. We help our clients. We've done these, they're actually really fun. I've been to a couple of design thinking workshops where we sort of help think through strategy for the efficiency portfolio in relation to tax credits, in relation to these state energy office programs, and sort of think through how you should be moving your programs to align with those programs and work well together. And then we can do more in-depth work to figure out what should the rebate be set at in relation to the state energy office rebate, for example. We also have a grant writing group that is very busy right now, but I would happy to take on more work helping folks apply for these, helping both utilities and helping states, helping local governments apply for different IRA and IIJA grants, and figure out, actually, I think a lot of their value is helping people figure out which grants to go after, because there's so many going out right now that there can be a tendency to just chase whatever we just heard about yesterday. But it's because there are so many, it's important to think strategically about what's coming down the road and which ones are most strategic for your organization, which ones you have the best chance at, and which ones help further your mission. So we can help sort of prioritize the grants you're going after, and then we can also write up applications. And then finally, we do advisory services, consulting, analysis, help designing pilot programs that maybe take advantage of some of these new federal dollars. So here are all there's my sales pitch. There's the things that ICF can help with if anyone is interested. And I think that was it. So happy to take any questions from folks on anything I put up here today.
Thanks, Erica. I appreciate that. That's a lot of information. The one that I did have pop up just a minute ago, I think I answered it correctly, was am I free to share the PDF version of this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I think I accidentally left here company confidential on just one slide, it looks like, but just ignore that. It's not.
Well, and it was on a few of them. That's why I was like, I better ask. But yeah, I'll send that out with the survey. When we send out our survey for this webinar, it'll go out with the survey, and then also it will be posted on the YouTube channel probably within about 72 hours.
Great.
All right, well, that's a lot of information. I now know why Texas is still on the fence. There's a lot of information here. Do you know of a reason? I mean, was there anything posted or said as to the reason behind why Florida decided not to accept it?
I think in Florida, it was a politics thing. Came down to who the governor. It was ultimately the governor. He vetoed. They needed some sort of seed money to help the state energy officer get ready for the grants, and he vetoed that money. So that's what happened there.
Yeah, I see that may be playing out with some few other cities as well. Other states, I'm sorry.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks again, Erica. I appreciate it. Thanks for the information. It was all great information. I know there's a lot of cities and municipalities on here that probably have a lot of questions. It's going to take this back to the people that make the decisions. But you're right. There's a lot of it that has some fast approaching dates that can expire that they need to think about it through their cities and decide on what they're going to do pretty quickly and how to allocate that money. I know there are some cities that have short staffs. So even getting the money, they just don't have enough people to do the work to get it started.
to think it through and fill out the applications. I feel that they're not to be taken lightly. Mostly, they're hefty things that are required to get that funding.
No, I agree with that. I think Oklahoma actually told us they hired a grant writer to get this process more streamlined instead of possibly getting turned down for some. They can
Right.
count more of their eggs in a basket because they've got someone that know how to write the grant proposals to be able to get a higher success rate.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, you need that. That is an expertise for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks again, Eric. I appreciate it, and thanks, guys, for joining us today. I will take over the screen real quick and just show my last slide, which basically is just my slideshow. I mean, my information on my information here at the end. Let's see. Yeah, so if you want to just take a screenshot or a picture of that, by all means, please send out my information. If you forget who it was that was presenting for us today, thankfully, you guys can always reach out and I can get you connected with ICF and Erica and her team. They can actually assist you guys in any way that they can with this stuff. It's important to see the fine line details and to be able to navigate through that and get what you need for your municipalities in the area. So I appreciate you guys being here. Thanks again, as always, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Appreciate it. Thanks, Erica.
Bye.